Hi, this is Peter Linder. I'm going to give you the rundown on why I think Couchbase is such a much better database than everything out there right now. I've done hundreds of interviews with developers, DevOps, architects, CTOs, even CEOs of companies with a lot of software. And it's very clear that they are all struggling with an increasing level of a huge amount of complexity in their data infrastructure. And with Couchbase, it's possible to spend much more time building your software instead of time building your infrastructure. And one thing you should really think about here is that when you're building your infrastructure, you're not really adding any value or like unique functionality to your company. You're just building generic stuff, like if you're adding full text search infrastructure, if you're building memory caching, if you're building analytics, all of that infrastructure and load balancing that you have all around that. It's not something that is unique for your company. It's something that's just generic stuff. It's not really adding value at all. And with Couchbase, you can get rid of so much of that complexity and make your life so much easier so you can build more of your own software. It's actually also the case that all this complexity is slowing developers down tremendously because when you're adding new functionality, it becomes so hard to figure out how that functionality is going to fit into all of the different pieces in your infrastructure. So Couchbase has a revolutionary architecture, and at the foundation of that is virtual buckets. So all data in Couchbase is automatically partitioned into 1024 virtual buckets. Those virtual buckets are automatically distributed across all nodes in the cluster, and each virtual bucket is automatically also hot swap replicated over to a different node with automatic failover. That means that if node 1 goes down, uh, the system will continue running perfectly from the client's perspective, because virtual bucket A and B will be activated on node 2 and 3. And while node 1 is restarted or replaced, yeah, everything just continues to run perfectly. And the DevOps person didn't need to do anything to make this happen, and the developer didn't need to do anything to make this happen. It just runs automatically and been taken care of by Couchbase. The developer just has one connection string to the cluster and just connects to all of this in a very easy way. And this also means that you can add any number of nodes you want to the cluster very easily. When you add, let's say, 10 or 100 nodes to the system, Couchbase automatically redistributes the virtual buckets across those new nodes, so it's evenly distributed. And then if that was just a peak load, then you can remove those 10 nodes again. And again, Couchbase just takes care of the redistribution of virtual buckets. Again, the developer didn't need to think about this at all, just continues to connect through one connection string. And DevOps engineer just needed to specify which the specifications for the nodes to add and just add them. Couchbase takes care of everything automatically behind the scenes. The cluster just continues to run with very high performance during the transition, and it's really smooth to handle all these like really complex scenarios. And in addition to this, the system is load balanced automatically, even without having to have load balancers. And that's because the client have a small data structure with a mapping between virtual buckets and nodes. That means that the client fetches the data that it wants directly from the correct node, and which of course means very high performance, and also that the clients take care of the load balancing, so you don't have to have a load balancer or several load balancers that many people have right across the cluster. That removes also a central point of contention and or failure, and also that you can just connect to the cluster with just one connection string, which is quite amazing. And this, of course, removes so much complexity that you would need to build to handle replication for hot swap replication, all the automatic failover stuff that you would need to set up. You actually don't need to think about partitioning your data, which is a huge pain for both DevOps and for developers in most cases. And again, just removing the need for all kinds of load balancers and just one connection string to the cluster. It also removes the need for auxiliary services that most infrastructures will include, like full text search, memory cache, analytics. In some cases, also like offline data access. So in Couchbase, all access to the data goes through a memory cache, which means that you don't need to invalidate the data. That's all taken care of by Couchbase. The only thing that the DevOps engineer needs to do is to specify the percentage of all the data that should be cached in memory. And you can also specify whether you need a disk at all backing that data. If you have certain use cases where you're just writing data so frequently, you'll burn out your disk behind. So some customers with that use case will have just everything kept in memory, so you can specify that you want more than one hot swap replication so that multiple servers can go down without you losing any memory. We have some cases where people or companies have run clusters with huge amounts of data, 1,500 servers for 7 years without losing any data at all, even without even having a disk backing at all. Then we have advanced full text search included. So you just specify which data to index with full text search, and the configuration for that. Basically comparable to Elasticsearch capabilities. So no need for having that, which is also really nice, because you will not need to invalidate your full text search. That's all taken care of by Couchbase automatically. You don't need to set up all these like load balancers that many people have in front of their full text engines, and again, no load balancers needed in front of your memory cache. It's just so easy when all the data is just kept in one place and automatically managed by one service. So you don't need to think about invalidation. You don't need to think about load balancing. You don't need to set up all those different services, especially when you're running on this whole thing on your laptop, or when you need to set up the infrastructure. So also, in addition to that, we have analytics, which is really good, because then you're operating on data in real time, or like a few milliseconds delays. But if you have your analytics on a separate data warehouse, oftentimes you won't have access to all your data, and you won't have access that's real time or close to real time. And then Couchbase supports offline data access, so that's why many retailers use Couchbase in their in the cash registers, because if the network goes down on Christmas Eve, they want to be able to continue to take payments from the customers, and they can do that very easily with Couchbase. It's super easy to set up offline read and write access. You can just continue to operate on the database even though there's no network to the main cluster. When the network comes back up, you can just continue. Then the Couchbase automatically syncs the data. Yeah, cool. And then it's incredibly easy to set up and manage cross-data center replication with read-write access. So for example, NASDAQ, they will have a cluster in EU and a cluster in New York, for example, just to be able to give the same write performance to the clients in Europe with the clients in the US. And with most other databases, you'll have only the capability to write to one cluster, and there's only read replications to other geographies. But with Couchbase, it's really easy to set up, so you can read and write to multiple clusters at the same time. Another thing that we've seen in the interviews that I've done is that people have really poor data in their staging environments frequently. And with Couchbase, you can use this cross-data center application with filtering, where you can privacy scramble, where you can scramble your privacy data. So you can then test your functionality much better with real data without compromising your privacy data. And then it's just mind-blowingly easy to set up. I mean, if you think about the complexity behind setting up read-write replication between different geographies, or between different data centers, is just incredible. Actually, Couchbase makes this so easy. I can take anyone off the street and have them set up a cluster in EU that's synced in almost real time with just a delay, of course, in the network, with a cluster in Asia. Really amazing. And then a lot of companies have increasing needs for being able to query geographic coordinates, and this is something that has been largely done, or like Postgres is the favorite database for that currently, for that use case, but Postgres is of course really hard to scale. You can do it, but it's just really requires a lot of complexity to be able to do that, and it actually doesn't scale well. So great to use Couchbase for that if you need to scale your geographic queries. Couchbase also have full support for traditional database functionality except schemas, so it's fully compliant with SQL, has ACID transactions, high performance joins, very high performance eventing infrastructure. It will run on your laptop, it runs on-prem and any cloud provider. And here, regarding schemas, you should think really hard before you put your data in a schema database, because it's hugely expensive, both in terms of the amount of hardware needed to run that thing, and also because it slows down your developers, especially if you have a distributed team of developers. You will struggle because, your developers will struggle because when they need to get something changed to the schema, they have to go through a committee and have to wait for it. A lot of developers that I've talked to, they've even given up on that stuff. It's just too much work, or it's just too slow. So they just really try to avoid that. And schemas should, of course, be on the API level. You should definitely have a schema in your API, of course. So when you have a schema in your API, you need to sync that with your database, and that also creates a lot of problems, of course, to keep those in sync. So definitely just keep your schema in your API layer. Don't have a schema in your database for sure. I mean, I can't really think of any use case where you would actually want a schema. And you need to trust your developers. That's basically you need to have developers that you can trust. You shouldn't force the schema just because you can't trust your developers. That's basically definitely the way to go. Couchbase has this amazing capability of offloading and querying old data. So increasingly companies will have just this enormous amounts of data, and a lot of that data becomes less relevant, or like you don't really operate that much on it after a while. So then it's good to archive it. So Couchbase has a configurable time to live, where you can actually trigger offloading from Couchbase into an archive like AWS S3. And then the Couchbase Analytics service can actually query over that archive data in S3. You just define a data set over that data, and you can even then join with current data in Couchbase So that's really crazy, I think amazing functionality. The performance and cost are just outstanding for Couchbase. The red blocks here are Couchbase Capella, which is the managed version of Couchbase. The green is MongoDB Atlas, which is the managed version of MongoDB. Blue is DynamoDB. Yellow is Redis. So as you can see, the operations per second here, this is the Yahoo Cloud benchmark. So it's a standard benchmark, just incredible. And what's not shown here is actually the latency. The latency is also just incredible for Couchbase in the 1 to 2 milliseconds, where other databases will have 10 milliseconds. You have cost per billion operations. It's just incredibly good in Couchbase as well. So with Couchbase, you will get so much less complexity. You will get a much better performance, and you reduce your cost. So that's a pretty incredible combination, right? And that's why we think Couchbase definitely should be your default choice for all data. But there are a few exceptions. So, for example, if you have event data series with producers and consumers, definitely use Kafka for that. A typical use case there is when you do integrations with other systems. Definitely use Kafka there instead of Couchbase. And then if you have heavy queries over huge amounts of data, like petabytes, petabyte is like 1,000 terabytes of data, especially if you have a single column analysis scenario, then use a special purpose data warehouse there instead. And Couchbase has great connectors to these types of services. So uncommon that you have that much data that you couldn't just use Couchbase Analytics, but when you do, definitely use that system and integrate with Couchbase for the data that you need to access frequently operationally. Great. So that's why many of the world's most popular companies use Couchbase. An interesting story is I heard from Perry at Couchbase is when if you think that you were going to fly from, for example, Stockholm, where I'm located, to San Francisco, you're just going to touch or use Couchbase so many times. So when you use TripAdvisor to figure out which hotel to stay at or where to go in San Francisco, you're using Couchbase. When you're booking your tickets and your hotel, all of those bookings pretty much go through Amadeus, and that uses Couchbase. The hotel that you book likely uses Couchbase. When you pay for all of this, you're using Visa, which uses Couchbase. And all of that, of course, is operating over the network. So Cisco routers are used, which use Couchbase. So then you take the cab to go to the airport, very likely also using Couchbase. You come to the airport, you buy something at Louis Vuitton. Their cash registers, of course, is using Couchbase. You watch something on Sky using Couchbase. You connect with some people that you want to connect with on LinkedIn, again using Couchbase. You play some Pokemon. There are some good Pokemons to catch on the airport, so again using Couchbase. When Pokemon Go became super popular back in the days, it went down just because there was so much pressure on their servers. They switched over to Couchbase just to be able to handle that. They could do it pretty quickly and up and running, and been running perfectly since then. So it's just incredible that Couchbase has been, it's really running the world right now. Even though most developers, or like very few developers, even advanced, very, very senior developers that I've talked to, don't know about Couchbase so much yet, because Couchbase has been focused on these larger companies. But it turns out that Couchbase is a really, really good service, even for startups. So a lot of startups are beginning to pick this up and start to use Couchbase. So here's my best practices for what to think about when you're migrating to Couchbase to make it as easy as possible. Definitely migrate without changing your data model to begin with. You can do that later if you need to after migration is completed. And then the typical migration plan that I will recommend is to first just migrate a snapshot of your data so you can start playing around with it. And then you can just execute some of your most important queries to see how they run on Couchbase. You can use the automated index advisor and analyzer that Couchbase provides to optimize your indexes. And then just start building a playground application to get started writing some code with the Couchbase SDK for your preferred programming language. And you can just try some like stuff that you think you would do. Just yeah. And then you build the full text search indexes that you need and access them with your playground application. And then you can integrate with the other services you need. For example, if you're doing an integration use case with Kafka or archiving with S3, or if you need like a petabyte level data warehouse, you can integrate with those and see how that works. It works, it works really well. So just get it up and running, and then you start migrating your code over to the Couchbase SDK. There are some ORM support as well. You can check that out on the website. And then you just start building your migration code. You, of course, decide whether you need to do an online migration or if you can bring your system offline, because that would, of course, make it easier when you're migrating your data. But, of course, it's also possible to do it while your system is online in the most cases. There are some data migration tools available, but you may need to develop your migration code that's specific to your data model. I typically just use ChatGPT to do that. You, of course, need to direct ChatGPT and be really careful to check what it says, but it's a tremendous help just to do that. And then you just do the migration. And just because I'm really trying to optimize the migration process to Couchbase, I'm offering free migration workshops at this time. So just ping me on LinkedIn. You can find me on there very easily with Peter Linder is my name, Peder Linder. So just send me a message there and we'll take care of that. And we see that developers, DevOps, architects, CTOs, and CFOs, of course, because of the low cost, love Couchbase. There's just so many praises for Couchbase. We no longer have to spend time and money developing all the backend technologies. With Couchbase, we can concentrate on delivering innovative user experiences that meet our customers' evolving needs. I wanted my team to focus on building our features, not database features. It was a very easy decision. It made our lives easier. The Couchbase installation was infinitely easier for developers to get up and running. It required almost no operational overhead. Couchbase provides a solution no others do. It gives us the modularity we need with immediate operational simplicity, high performance, and room for scalability. Couchbase Capella has the best pricing and performance we've seen from DBaaS. We've reduced cost by 50% and increased performance by 2000%. With Couchbase, my top engineers didn't have to focus on the mobile sync and data management challenges anymore. For us to set up a resilient implementation of Couchbase, it took us minutes. We stood up 3 servers, lit them up, balanced the load, and instantly we were resilient. We evaluated a lot of database products while looking for a system that was fast, scalable, flexible, and easy to get. Our goal of high write and read throughputs on large volumes of data led us to Couchbase. Couchbase full text search allows us to deliver customer search results from extremely large data sets very efficiently, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on. So this leads me to the claim that I think that the difference between Couchbase and all other databases is like as big. It's comparable to the difference between Git and SVN. Back in the days when everyone was storing their source code in SVN, they were really struggling with that, but they kind of got used to it. But definitely a struggle. And that's very similar to how people are struggling with their complex infrastructure around their data currently. And Couchbase similarly Git just solved source code. It's so much a better experience. And Couchbase is very similar. It just solves complexity. You don't need all of that complexity anymore. You just get rid of it. It just slashes through all of that. And so my claim is that just like everyone switched from SVN to Git, everyone will switch over to whatever database infrastructure they're using currently to Couchbase. There will not be a single company using, or a single company, of course. There's probably some company using SVN still, but it's like I don't know where to find them. So yeah, that's my claim. Everyone will use to cache. Of course, there might be in the future some comparable database that to Couchbase, but currently there isn't. So that's what's available right now. All right. So thanks so much. I'd love to hear from you. Please message me on LinkedIn if you want to do a free migration workshop. All right. Take care.